Ladies and gentlemen, beautiful people, welcome to the 97 Republic YouTube channel, where we react to news and live events of different sports. So I kindly ask that you hit the like button and the subscribe button, as that will really help this channel grow. And to ensure you don't skip a beat, click the notification bell as well. That way you can guarantee that you don't miss any of the action. Alright, so let's go. Main card predictions for UFC Fight Night Cejudo vs Yadong starting right now. So we start off the main card in the light heavyweight division with Alonzo Menifield taking on Julius Walker. Now if we look at both fighters' respective careers within the UFC, Alonzo Menifield has had 14 fights inside the UFC, managed to win 8 of them. Julius Walker is making his debut this weekend against Alonzo Menifield. Based off of that statistic alone, would probably be making my prediction, but if I had to justify it, usually when a guy makes his debut inside of the UFC, tends to fight an unranked opponent. Alonzo Menifield is currently ranked number 15 inside of the light heavyweight division, does not seem to bode well for Julius Walker at all. And if we had to look at both fighters' respective skill set, and disregarding the experience for now, feels like Alonzo Menifield also has the advantage with regards to skill set, seeing that he has more power in his punches, feels like he's the better wrestler with regards to offensive and defensive wrestling, tends to mix it up whenever he feels like it, and basically the advantages for Julius is that he has better cardio and he's basically a quicker striker, but he does tend to get hit, and do not think he would be able to afford getting hit by one of Alonzo's mitts, seeing that Alonzo packs serious power. And with regards to Julius Walker and where I feel he's susceptible, in his fourth professional fight against a guy named Niall Bartley, Niall was able to take Julius down on multiple occasions. Now this goes without saying, no disrespect to Niall of course, but if Niall Bartley was able to take Julius down on multiple occasions, would definitely think and probably safe to assume that Alonzo Menifield would be able to do the same thing. And with that being said, I don't think this fight goes the distance either, so cardio, don't really think it's as applicable. I have Alonzo Menifield winning, probably knocking out Julius Walker in Julius's debut. Not the best start to a UFC career, however I do think Julius has potential. Just do not like this matchup at all. Then moving on to the second fight on the main card. In the featherweight division, Silva takes on Baghdasaryan. Silva, 3 fights within the UFC, won all 3 of them, all 3 coming by way of knockout. Now sure, didn't knock out Drew Dober, was a doctor stoppage, but that technically counts as a TKO. Baghdasaryan, 4 fights within the UFC, 3 wins, 1 loss. With regards to striking, Silva, power. A lot of power, and explosive power at that as well. Baghdasaryan, technical, volume. If we look at both men and how they match up, don't think we'd see a lot of wrestling in this fight. If we had, probably the advantage would go to Silva, even though both men are really big for 145. Silva, he has a big frame. It's not very muscular, but he has a big frame, very dense bone structure, just a big guy for that division. Obviously, having as much explosive power and basically just raw strength in general. Where Baghdasaryan, even though he's big for the division as well, way more muscular. So with that being said, tends to have a worse cardio than Silva. And with regards to Silva's way of fighting, with regards to his striking in particular, due to the fact that he's an explosive puncher and does everything explosive, does not tend to really have a lot of volume with regards to his striking. So basically he is way more control over his cardio, has way more control over his cardio, where Baghdasaryan, being a volume striker, tends to eat at your cardio way more. So I do feel like Silva has the considerable advantage on the feet, because not only is he explosive, not only does he have a lot of power, able to take a lot of shots. In that Drew Dober fight, he was able to eat some shots, and Drew Dober packs power as well for lightweight. Once again, Gene Silva fought Drew Dober at lightweight. He's fighting Baghdasaryan at featherweight. The guy is massive. And I do think that he'd be able to afford to get hit by Baghdasaryan. However, I do not think the opposite applies. I don't think Baghdasaryan can afford getting hit by Silva. We saw in Silva's debut against Wilson, looked like a mismatch. Looked like the UFC vet was actually Gene Silva and not Wilson. We saw it in the second fight, knocking out Charles Jourdain, who is a good featherweight, a good all-round featherweight. Then moving up to lightweight, basically picking apart Drew Dober with his counter punches. And that's the problem. Gene Silva can fight on the back foot equally as well as he does on the front foot. Baghdasaryan, predominantly a front foot striker. And that would basically be his way of approaching this fight. And I do not think that it is actually an advantage for Baghdasaryan. I do think Gene Silva gets it done. Honestly, I'm going with knockout. He has had 3 fights within UFC, all 3 of them knockout. Big guy, a lot of explosive power. Do think that the fight will probably not see the ground. Do think it will be predominantly fought on the feet. I do think Gene Silva has the advantage on the feet as well. I'm picking Gene Silva to win this fight. Basically, knocking out Baghdasaryan. I'd probably say third round. The third round knockout. Melsik basically starts fatiguing. He starts getting tired, and I do think that would be the perfect opportunity for Gene Silva to knock him out. Then heading into our third fight in the bantamweight division, where Rob Font is taking on Gene Matsumoto. Now once again, a massive discrepancy in experience with regards to Rob Font and Gene Matsumoto. Now even though Gene has had 16 professional fights within his mixed martial arts career, only 2 of them has been inside of the UFC. And even though he has managed to win both of them, there's a big difference between regional circuits, between even small organizations and the UFC. Seeing that the best of the best compete in the UFC, that's why I put so much emphasis on seeing UFC records. Now sure, it is not the end all and be all, but it tends to give you a lot of perspective to how good a fighter actually is, with regards to how good his opponents actually was. And Rob Font has had 18 fights within the UFC alone, managed to win 11 of them. 7 of those victories came via stoppage, 6 of them via knockout or TKO, and 1 of them via submission. Now with regards to Rob Font and Gene Matsumoto, with regards to their skill set, both men are predominantly strikers, and both men have a very heavy boxing stance, and the fundamentals of their striking is predicated on boxing. The only difference is Rob Font is probably one of the best boxers, like pure boxing, inside of the UFC, and probably has one of the top 5 jabs within the UFC. Have not seen someone outperform Rob Font on the feet. Whenever Rob Font loses, it tends to be due to his glaring weakness, which is obviously wrestling. We saw it in the Kyler Phillips fight, we saw it in the Corey Sandhagen fight, saw it in the Marlon Vera fight. The guy does not have the best wrestling defense, and that gets exposed and he basically loses the fight by unanimous decision. But with regards to striking, not a lot of people that could actually outperform Rob Font on the feet, due to the fact that, for one, he's an exceptionally good striker, really good boxer, doesn't need good head movement because his chin is made out of concrete. He has a cinder block for a chin. Do not think that anesthetics would be able to knock out Rob Font, seeing that he has never lost via knockout, has lost once via submission. So that is why, safe to assume that whoever Rob Font faces, he'd probably have the advantage on the feet. And that is basically the problem for Gene Matsumoto in this fight. That, not saying it is impossible for Gene to knock out Rob Font. We've seen crazier shit happen within the UFC, but highly unlikely for Gene Matsumoto to knock out Rob Font, and highly unlikely for Gene to actually have the advantage on the feet. So personally feel like, and I personally think that if Gene would want to win this fight, he'd have to do it via wrestling. Seeing that I do believe Gene has better wrestling, but is it that much better that he can actually control the fight and actually dominate with his wrestling? seeing that he was able to take down Brad Katona in his second UFC fight, and Brad Katona obviously being a really good wrestler, really good grappler. Do I think he'll be able to impose his will on Rob Font? I don't. That's why I'm picking Rob Font to win this fight, and I'm probably gonna say I think Rob Font's winning by unanimous decision. I don't think he's gonna knock out Gene Matsumoto. However, I do feel like Rob Font has seen everything with regards to opponents inside of the UFC. Obviously, Rob has probably seen it. Don't know what Rob has seen, but with regards to opponents, he has fought every stylistic matchup you can think of inside of the UFC. He has fought the Marlon Moraes of the world, the Chito Veras, Corey Sandhagen, Adrian Yanez, Kyler Phillips. He has seen everything, Cody Garbrandt. So do not think that Gene Matsumoto would be able to show him anything that he hasn't experienced before. Now, obviously, with that being said, Rob's probably going to eat a couple of punches. He usually tends to do that. But he's so durable, and as I previously mentioned, that probably won't get knocked out. However, if the roles were reversed and Gene had to eat those punches, I don't think the same applies. So I'm picking Rob Font to win, Rob Font via unanimous decision. Then going on to the co-main event of UFC Fight Night Cejudo vs Yadong, we have Brendan Allen versus Anthony Hernandez. Now, with regards to this fight in the middleweight division, both men seem to match up somewhat well against one another, where it's basically the same person, just with a little twist, just with a little bit of nuance. Seeing that Brendan Allen is predominantly a wrestler, aiming to get you on the ground and submit you, where Anthony Hernandez is predominantly a wrestler, tends to get you on the ground and basically finish you in whatever means necessary, whether it be by brutal elbows or whether it be by submission. He can do both. With regards to experience, Brendan Allen has the advantage, seeing that he has had 15 fights within the UFC and has been really good with regards to his UFC career, where he has won 12 of them and only lost 3. And Anthony Hernandez has had 9 fights within the UFC, managed to win 7 of them, only lost 2 of them. Now, very similar with regards to their situation, with regards to their fighting style, with regards to experience, seeing that prior to this loss, prior to Brendan Allen's loss against Nasruddin Imavov, Allen was on a 6-fight winning streak. Anthony Hernandez is currently on a 6-fight winning streak, and basically it tends to happen where if both men are really credentialed grapplers and are really good at either wrestling or the clinch, tend to see a striking contest. Now, if that is the case, I do think that the advantage would be with Fluffy Hernandez, seeing that he doesn't take as much damage as Brendan Allen does. With the way that Anthony Hernandez actually counters or even uses his head movement, gets out of the way, tends to protect himself a lot better than Brendan Allen does. Where Brendan Allen basically just has a lot of will and basically march through some punches to be able to impose his will on his opponent. And we've seen it backfire. We've seen it backfire against Sean Strickland. We've seen it backfire against Chris Curtis. Now, do I think that Anthony Hernandez has the same striking credentials as either Sean Strickland or Chris Curtis? I don't. However, I do feel like if the fight plays out on the feet, if they had to have a 3-round kickboxing fight where no wrestling took place, I do believe that Anthony Hernandez would actually win that fight. I do feel like he is the better striker and mixes it up a lot better than Brendan Allen does. Now, Allen is extremely durable, but so is Hernandez as well. And keep in mind, with regards to submissions, the majority of Brendan Allen's submissions has come via rear naked choke. We're basically a rear naked choke specialist. Anthony Hernandez has managed to submit Rodolfo Vieira, who is arguably one of the best grapplers in the sport, and not in the middleweight division, in the sport. And Anthony Hernandez submitted him. Now, sure, Rodolfo was somewhat inexperienced with regards to his UFC career, and so was Anthony Hernandez. Anything could have happened. But it basically just goes to show how good Anthony Hernandez is. And the way that he's been exposing of Edmund Shabazian, Michel Pereira, the wins that he's managed to rack up, genuine threat within the middleweight division. And the same applies to Brendan Allen. I do think it's going to be an incredible matchup. But with that being said, I have Anthony Hernandez winning. I think Anthony Hernandez beats Brendan Allen. And I think he beats him by ground and pound. I think at some point, we'll probably have a wrestling exchange. Might happen extremely quick within the fight, might happen a little bit later. Have them feel each other out on the feet. But then I do think that Anthony Hernandez transitions, ends up on top, and he lands devastating ground and pound. Absolutely devastating ground and pound. We saw it in the Baghdasaryan fight. We saw it in the Menifield fight. I think he does it again. And I don't think Brendan Allen survives that. I'm going with Anthony Hernandez 4th round knockout via ground and pound. 4th round TKO rather, via ground and pound. Then moving on to the main event. Henry Cejudo taking on Song Yadong. Now with regards to experience, both men similarly experienced, seeing that both men has had 14 fights inside of the UFC. Henry Cejudo has managed to win 10 of his 14 fights. Song Yadong managed to win 10 of his 14 fights. Very similar with regards to their record. However, where they differ dramatically is in the way they fight. Where Henry has a very wrestling strong type of fighting style, mixed with karate, where he has a karate stance, bounces a lot back and forth, closes the distance whenever he feels like it, escapes, has a strong karate stance mixed in with wrestling. And Song Yadong basically just has, I'll probably say a normal stance with regards to striking. However, Song Yadong does not really use wrestling, seeing that he is really good on the feet. He is a really good striker. Where obviously Henry Cejudo, having the background, having the credentials in wrestling, tends to use it. And I do feel like if Henry wants to win this fight, goes without saying, it is blatantly obvious, he needs to wrestle Song Yadong. Even though Henry has had some good knockouts over the likes of Dominic Cruz, TJ Dillashaw, do not think he would be able to knock Song Yadong out, seeing that nobody has been able to knock out Song Yadong. Not Petr Yan, not Corey Sandhagen, even though that fight was stopped, it was due to a cut. No one's been able to knock out Song Yadong. Do not think Henry would be able to do it either. And Henry basically has to wrestle Song, because on the feet, I think Song Yadong is piecing up Henry Cejudo. I don't think that's a bold statement, it's not a bold claim. I think it's blatantly obvious that Song Yadong would absolutely crack Henry's case if they had to fight for 5 rounds standing up. The only problem is Song actually has somewhat good wrestling defense. Saw it in the Petr Yan fight, saw it in the Corey Sandhagen fight. He has somewhat good wrestling defense. Now obviously neither one of those guys compared to Henry Cejudo's wrestling. But this is probably a bold statement. But I'm picking Song Yadong to win this fight. And the reason for it being is I genuinely believe, and it sucks to say this, that Henry Cejudo is past his prime. I don't know how hungry Henry still is to actually fight, to actually compete. Whether he's doing it for the money or whether he genuinely wants to be champion once again. Henry basically retired in his prime. After beating Dominic Cruz, deciding on retirement was insane. Now obviously he had his reasons, and no one could really argue or no one's actually in Henry's shoes. Nobody has the perspective he does. But it was insane. He was basically in his prime and decided to retire. Had a long layoff, basically 3 years, and came back. No one would perform the way they did if they had to do that, apart probably from John Jones. So with that being said, we saw Henry fight in 2023 against Elgin. We saw him fight once in 2024 against Marab. Saw him fight a year later now against Song Yadong. So the ring rust, the inexperience of being able to fight once every single year and only once, fighting 3 times in a 3-year period, I do think that actually has a toll. Where Song Yadong has been pretty active, Henry has been the exact opposite. Song Yadong is still young, extremely hungry, wants to improve. And with that being said, Song has never lost 2 consecutive fights within the UFC. Now he's lost his previous fight against Petr Yan. Do not think he'll lose again. I think Song Yadong wins. I think he wins by a knockout. I think he probably beats Henry, I'd say 3rd or 4th round knockout. I think he catches Henry with probably a high kick. Henry doesn't see it. And ground and pound, Song Yadong beats Henry Cejudo. Now, that is basically my predictions for the main card of UFC Fight Night, Cejudo versus Yadong. Let me know in the comment section what are your predictions with regards to every fight? What do you think is going to be fight of the night with regards to the main card? And basically just who do you think is going to win each fight? I would really appreciate that. Enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy UFC Fight Night, Cejudo versus Yadong.